Hello, Megan. Happy Friday.
Indeed, happy Friday. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I am doing all right. How are you?
Good. Good. Darlene said it's been a long week, and I could not agree more.
Long and hot week up here.
Yeah, Camille was just saying it's in triple digits this week. So hot that soccer practice got canceled
And unfortunately, all of the pools have closed at
because
Labor Day.
summer's over.
So summer is quote unquote over, but really it is not in this
That
state.
just means slip and slides in the lawn.
Yeah, exactly.
We do know that Emily will be joining as soon as she can. She's in transit on an airplane. So we will get started. We're at 10:29, but I suspect Lawrence will be joining us at any moment. I spoke with Lawrence yesterday.
Doing good. I can sing. Maybe worst case we can have you soon. Yeah.
We're at 10:30. What do y'all think? You want to give it one more minute for Lawrence, or we can get started and I can do all the front end business for the recording and the record, and maybe that'll give Lawrence another moment or two to join.
Will you log into the Caleb as you
Yeah, I think
Okay.
we can start.
Okay. Camille, I'm gonna mute your conference room for a second. I cannot because I have no co-host privileges. But would you mind muting if you for a moment?
Yes, I
So
can.
cool, thank you. Okay, good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. This is a meeting of the California Agricultural Land Equity Task Force, Sustaining Natural and Cultural Resources Subcommittee. My name is Megan Wiley. I'm a facilitator with Sacramento State University. We also have staff support on the line with us this morning in the room. Camille Frazier and Caleb Swanson, and we've got Sean Kennedy calling in from his office space. In a second, we'll do roll call with task force members. I'm waiting for another task force member or two to join here. So I'm just going to cruise through the front end business. Camille, if you would be so kind as to advance us to the next slide. Standard participation guidelines. We're here to exchange ideas, to listen openly and collaboratively with each other. And the topics we're discussing today fall underneath the dimension or the umbrella topic of sustaining natural and cultural resources. Of course, there's overlap with some of the work that other subcommittees and the task force at large are working on, but here we're going to stay to our agenda topics related to this particular subtopic. Next slide. If you are joining us as a member of the public, we will make space at the end, as always, for public comment associated with our discussion topics today, as well as general public comments. We do have an online public comment form. It's available on our Strategic Growth Council website at sgc.ca.gov/meetings-events. But also, you are more than welcome to use your raised hand feature at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar. Pretty easy for us to see and manage, and we can just let you know when it's time to unmute yourself and share your comment. We'll keep an eye on time. We like to use about a 2-minute time limit for public comments. And if any members of the task force who are not appointed subcommittee members join us today, they're joining us as attendees in observation only mode. Zoom tips, next slide. I think we can fly through this one, but everyone is muted upon entry. Raise hand feature, that's the most important thing. Bottom right-ish section of your toolbar, and that will let us know you want to get in the queue for public comment. Next slide is our agenda for today. So we're together for 90 minutes until 12 o'clock Pacific time. It's really a working session, discussion of next steps. So we will first take a quick look at the meeting minutes from our prior meeting. This group met one time already on July 2nd. And then we'll move right into updates on research requests that we received at the July meeting and let you all know what's going on with other subcommittees and the establishment of working groups. Then we really want to spend time together brainstorming what this subcommittee should be working on as far as next steps based on what you hear on status of the research and the focus for the next couple of months. We shared in the meeting, the briefing materials for this meeting, a resource from Redbud Resource Group. It's some materials that are already in existence, and we pulled out just a couple of key components from that resource. So we'll do a fly through of that and have a little conversation on if and how that can be useful to the task force efforts. Before we close out, as always, we'll do a quick summarization of our talk today and review action items. And then we'll take a quick peek at meeting schedule and get prepared for the upcoming full task force meeting that's happening in November. Okay, that's agenda review. So before we launch into it, let's do a quick roll call. Members who are present today, member Darlene Franco. Darlene, you're on mute.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm here.
How you doing?
Go ahead.
And member Thea Rittenhouse.
Yes, here, present.
Wonderful. Absent at the moment are subcommittee members Lawrence Harlan and Vice Chair Emily Burgueño. We do expect Emily to join us about midway through after she completes her transit. So quorum is established, 204. Okay, first quick item of business is review and approval of the July 2nd meeting minutes. I have those prepared and I can pull them up as needed. I did receive word that a few small edits are coming our way and I haven't received them yet, but I do anticipate to get them from Emily shortly. So I was going to propose that we actually postpone approval of this meeting summary and then just do the approval at our subsequent meeting along with the meetings that will generate from today. But I wanted to pause to see if Darlene or Thea, you had any revisions you would like seen in the meeting summary from July.
No.
I don't have any further suggestions, and I was not present at the July meeting, so I defer to Darlene.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Darlene. Thanks for the review, and we'll just hold off on official approval of this, and we can review the forthcoming edits together next meeting. All right, here we go. Working session. Camille's going to lead us through this next section.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
You sound great.
Great. Thank you for being here. Nice to see you and have the second meeting of the Sustaining Natural and Cultural Resources Subcommittee. So the way we're going to spend...
Sorry, Camille, didn't mean to interrupt you, but before you got into it, I just wanted to acknowledge for the record, member Lawrence Harlan just joined. Thanks for joining us, Lawrence. Perfect timing. We're just launching into the working session. Sorry, Camille.
No problem.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to just launch in, and I wanted to start out by saying that we were thinking today for this working session, since this is the second meeting, but we also have Darlene and Thea here for the first time in the subcommittee. I want to do an overview of some of the requests, the research requests and ideas that had come up in our first meeting, give you an update on those, give you a sense of what staff had understood as the work requested, where we're at in that process. Spend a little time sort of talking through some of the other things that have evolved as other subcommittees have continued their work. And then share a bit of those resources, as Megan said, from the Redbud Resource Group, just to see whether there's anything that this subcommittee might find valuable in that. So to start us off, wanted to give you an update on the research requests that had come through in the first meeting of this subcommittee. So there's 3 slides. There were 3 kind of distinct research requests that, as you can see with this first one, which I'll talk through in just a minute, Some of them are relatively broad and have a few components under them, and then others will be more specific to a particular issue. So starting with this kind of biggest, broadest one, we heard in the first subcommittee meeting that there was interest in a policy analysis, right? An understanding of existing legislation regulations related to sovereignty, barriers to sovereignty, was preventing people from practicing sovereignty, and then mechanisms to facilitate and prioritize sovereignty. And what we are proposing, and what we've already sort of started doing, is staff will do some desk research, right? Some sort of overview research of policies. And we also are planning to collaborate with others who are experts in these fields, who are knowledgeable in these fields. So legal scholars, right, who can say more about key policy areas that we heard from you all in that first meeting. So I'm going to reflect back to you what staff understood those areas to be, and would like to then stop and let all of you tell us whether that feels like it mapped on to the things that you would particularly like to focus on as you're thinking through policy, both barriers and then opportunities, right? So cultural fire, ancestral land return, land back, protection of native sites, lands, remains, artifacts, and then consultation, nation-to-nation relations. So those were some kind of key policy areas that were discussed and that staff are planning to do sort of research into existing legislation and potential legislative recommendations to advance sovereignty in these areas. So I'll pause there and see whether anyone in the subcommittee has any thoughts on this slide or suggestions. Could be potential collaborators, right? Just pause here and see if anyone has thoughts. And please feel free to unmute and speak as you're ready.
That looks like a good overview to me.
Other thoughts? And thank you for that, Darlene. Other thoughts? I know that reflecting back that first meeting, right? So I know with the people in the room, I think it was only Lawrence who was in that first meeting. So I'll open up also to say, Darlene, you said this looks like a good list, but Thea and Lawrence, of course, is there anything that you feel like should be part of this list that isn't there? Or does this seem like a good sort of set of key policy areas to use to kind of launch that investigation?
No, that looks good. The one thing I would just add is maybe we should add is native ancestral land return
Okay.
to be more specific.
Okay. Understood. Thank you for that. Lawrence, do you think sorry. One quick question to Lawrence, and then Lawrence, I was going to ask you if you think in general that's just an important, when you're talking about ancestral land return, it's helpful to always make sure and native would be the right word there. Just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
I think so. Yes.
Okay. Thank you for that. I'm sorry, I cut someone off. Was that you, Thea?
Oh, it's okay, Camille. I just had a question because I wasn't present at the July meeting. Is this just an analysis of legislation only, or is it also looking at mechanisms within the state, like grant programs and or things like that?
It's a good question. I think that because grant programs are otherwise being considered by the Grants and Resources Subcommittee, the way that the conversation, and of course anyone else jump in here, but the way that the conversation had unfolded in the first meeting of this subcommittee was focused more on policy, right, on legislation and regulation.
Great, thank you. Thanks for the clarification.
Yeah, good question.
After I'm reading your slide here, maybe you don't need to put the native, but because I see the request, but I would be more specific as well on the request to include tribal sovereignty before the two mentions of sovereignty.
Thank you, Lawrence. Understood. Okay. I appreciate your attention to detail because the more we can get the language right now, the more prepared everyone will be when it comes to the actual drafting of recommendations. So appreciate that attention. Okay, well, I suppose from here I'll move. Like I said, there's actually 3 research update slides. So I'll move to the next one, but of course, we can come back to this one, or maybe as we continue our conversation today, there might be other things that emerge. And I should say here, there's a slide that we'll see later on that says this, but we are aiming to have at least a first set of observations about these things, as first set of analysis about these policy areas in December. So I just want you all to know that I have a sense of that timeline. And the goal for that is so that you have some material that you can then use to start to think through draft recommendations. And I think as many of you might already know, because you've been in other subcommittee meetings, but we're really aiming for in the February task force meeting to have a very preliminary draft of that final report. So just I wanted to kind of remind you of that timeline here and as we keep moving through.
So real quick, when we talk about policy analysis, what are we talking about? Because I'm thinking of like, is it going to include the decision maker? Like you're going to look at kind of the decision makers, their, where this lands on their priorities, probability of positions. Is that what we're thinking? Is that what that's gonna be included in the policy analysis?
That's a good question. Let me say what I think staff understand that term to mean, and then Lawrence, I'd like to hear from you whether there are other areas or ways you'd like to think of this. So policy analysis really would mean looking at existing policy and trying to find what's been written about that policy. There's been listening sessions going on for a long time now, right, in a variety of forums about the challenges navigating existing legislation and regulations. So trying to look both at policy and then what's already known about experiences bumping up against or mobilizing that policy toward the end of sovereignty, right? Or in a way that it actually creates a barrier. So it really is looking at the policy and then at what has been published or what is sort of shared about experiences navigating that. So it is less, I think, of what you had described and more of starting with existing laws and regulations and trying to build out an analysis of the effects of that policy. Does that help get a sense of what that research would be?
Yeah, it does. And the second part, mechanisms to facilitate and prioritize, that's part of existing. Okay, so you're talking about more like analyzing existing policy.
Exactly. And then there are a lot of reports, right, that will, and what we're doing now, that kind of staff research piece of it, is compiling existing reports that say, okay, so right now, here is where cultural fire is prohibited, and here are the reasons. And there are recommendations already out there. And Lawrence, as you know from our first meeting, really the request was find out what some of those existing recommendations are, bring them to the subcommittee.
Yeah.
So that you can go through them and think through them. So it really is going to be a look at what is on the books, what is existing policy, and then what are people already saying, sharing about possible mechanisms or even within existing policy pathways to make sure sovereignty is prioritized and realized.
Yeah, because I was thinking, and I know it's a lot of work, but if possible, that's great what you said, but if possible, on the recommendations, analysis on the recommendations. Because if you recommend recommendation A, you give us 3 recommendations, it's good to know on the probability of ranking them, what's the probability that between the 3 recommendations? This is most likely to happen with the current legislature versus this is less likely to happen, if possible. But I like where it's going.
Understood. Thank you for that addition. That's helpful for us to think through. And I do think we will look to all of you as well as people who in your own lives and experiences are engaging with the advocacy process, right, with the legislative process in different capacities. We'll also look to you as knowledgeable to that point you just made, Lawrence. Like, where are you seeing energy? Where are you seeing potential? And where are you seeing kind of doors being closed, right? You all also are experienced in this world. And I'll just point out also that collaboration piece. So we really will be looking to the point of making recommendations. I think, Lawrence, partly what you were just thinking of is recommendations that are actionable and that might actually move things forward. So that really, I think, will be also helpful to bring in people in like our advisory committee that we have talked about in the past, people who have other perspectives that aren't within staff or within the task force to complement that knowledge of existing recommendations and what's going on around them. I hope that helps a little bit, but thank you for that addition because it is slightly different from what is on this slide. So we will definitely think through that and come back to you again with some thoughts on that.
Thank you. Very helpful.
Thanks, Lawrence. Megan, you were unmuted. Did you want to jump in?
I think you were making the same, you expressed the same sentiment that was on my mind, Camille, of kind of encouraging everyone to maintain an open mind. And even if staff is doing a type of preliminary assessment or analysis of something, we're going to really be looking to you all as subject matter experts and people with lived experience to conduct some of your own analysis and really, not be limited by existing opinions, because what you put forward and what you end up discussing in your recommendations has weight behind it. So yeah, Camille, you got it. Sean.
So just to jump on that train, and Camille raised this too, but part of our intent with the advisory committee was to do just that, Lawrence, to be a resource for you, for the task force in general, as you develop recommendations, and you may be looking at 3 potential pathways that could lead you to a certain outcome, and then to engage with the advisory committee to assess the feasibility of different pathways, how they would actually be operationalized and work in practice. And so that then, it's sort of going both ways, what we talked about here. One, looking to you for your lived experience and to have those initial ideas and the imagination and creativity and think where we're trying to go. But as we need to turn some of these things into policy, that we will be providing the resources through that advisory committee to help with some of those aspects as well, which then does, I think, hopefully get to what you're asking for us to add in terms of this initial research request here.
Thank you. Any other thoughts or questions here? Okay, I'll move to the next slide. Of course, we can come back. These are all really great conversations that extend actually beyond this one research topic, so we can come back to that. But let me go forward to this. Another request that we had heard in July, right? July meeting, losing track of time, was a summary of ratified treaties. And so we wanted to respond to that research request and let you know that staff would be doing and are working to do an overview of those ratified treaties. And what we're imagining this could be will be it would be part of a broader staff effort, and along with like collaborations with historians and people who have kind of a wider understanding of the history of land theft, right? The history of both ratified and unratified treaties within the state, right? Building out some context that will be very important for that final report. So I know as you all have been doing your work with the task force, there's both recommendations, but then there's also everyone has been expressing, and as we've been reflecting back to you what we've heard, there's also very much an interest in context setting, right? Telling the story of why land equity it doesn't exist, right? Why it is really an inequitable process right now. So we just wanted to explain that we will, again, we have that sort of January plan that we'll come up with an overview of the summary of ratified treaties. It will be part of a broader sort of historical context setting piece of what we imagine could be part of that final report. If the task force, right, decides that that should be a part of that final report, which includes recommendations and also further context. So I hope what I just said is clear. Anyone have any thoughts or questions from there?
Yeah, I'm a little confused. Summary of what ratified treaties?
Within the state of California. So there were also a lot of unratified treaties. And I believe maybe, Lawrence, this is something that you could speak to as well if you have sort of further thoughts or clarification. But I believe that the interest from that previous meeting was saying, well, what of the treaties that were ratified, what are the like legal structures, right, that are part of those treaties and of those lands and of those relationships to sovereignty? So, Darlene, does that give you a better sense of what that first request was?
Yeah, I'm not aware of any ratified treaties in California. That's my confusion. So I didn't know if you meant to say a summary of the unratified treaties.
Well, so we should connect about this. And
Okay.
I understood that there were some, very few.
Okay. I mean, I could be wrong. I'm just not aware of any. Okay.
Okay, well, that's really helpful. We'll look into that. Lawrence, did you have anything you wanted to add there?
Yeah, that's my understanding that there was at least one, maybe more for California tribes. So that's why it's important. Let's figure this out. Are there any, and how many are there, and how many in yeah, and then if you expand it, how many were written and then not ratified for California tribes?
Yeah, I think yeah, just summary of both ratified and unratified. And one thing that I think I would like to be investigated also as far as like the unratified treaties.
Mm-hmm.
Like the unratified treaties basically said we're gonna give you this plot of land and blah blah blah, right? People were tribes were given certain areas. And so what I would like to see is in any of those areas,
Mm-hmm.
um, if there is any land owned by the state of California that's not being used, if there's a possibility that that can be made accessible to those tribes in those areas. Um, and I specifically for our people, we were allocated the land basically, which is Highway 99 right
Mm-hmm.
now. And I know that there was land purchased. Now, I don't know if this is federal or state, but land purchased for the high speed railroad
Mm-hmm.
that was um what do they call where they eminent domain? A lot of people, but then their plans changed and the railroad was, changed the areas. So my understanding is there is still land that is just sitting there that
Mm-hmm.
was purchased. So I would like that to find out if there's land available that could be used for access for both agriculture or um, cultural uses.
Thank you, Darlene. That's a helpful context and addition for this. And thank you, Lawrence, also for providing a bit more context. I think what I probably did not say particularly well the first time is that we're thinking of these kinds of summaries of the history of land theft, unratified treaties. Are there ratified treaties? What do they say, right? What are legal rights of access to land now is what this research request would do. But Darlene, to your point, there's also kind of the contemporary moment. So seeing related to that history of land theft, right? What then does that set up for? What kinds of opportunities does that set up in this contemporary moment? So we'll come back, I think, Darlene, the sort of specific thought that you shared related to public land, right? And land back, right? Is something that I think we can continue to talk about and is a subject for one of the other subcommittees. So in a slide, I will say that. Sorry, Darlene.
Okay. That sounds good.
Okay, but I really appreciate that. I think what we'll do is we understand that this research request is actually much larger than the request written there, and is more about a summary of the history of unratified, ratified treaties overlapping with ancestral lands, so you can get a better sense of that dispossession. Am I right? Did I understand that correctly? Is that a better representation?
Yeah. And if they want to sell it, we'll buy it back for 47 cents an acre. That's what they paid. They paid for. So
that's what it was. Thank you, Darlene. Okay, so I think we have a better sense of this, which is helpful. It'll help us with these next steps. And we will, of course, come back to you and make sure that the work reflects what you will find valuable. And that work will not be done by December, right? But we can give you at least a sense of where things stand in December. And as you have thoughts of who is especially knowledgeable about these histories, please don't hesitate to let staff know how to make sure that knowledge is part of what is built through this process. Any other thoughts on this slide? And I will move to the third research request that we had heard. Okay. So this is related to that last one. It was a request to actually visualize, right, some of those histories. The comparison between the sort of historical moment and then the contemporary forms of land ownership, right? So a map that shows ancestral lands, of which there are many, right, that you can access, but really thinking about that map alongside contemporary public lands and private lands, so contemporary land ownership. So staff have been thinking through this. What could a map do? So this would be a really important thing to show through a map, right? And so tribal ancestral lands, native ancestral lands, current land ownership. But actually, I think there are quite a few other kinds of layers that would be very valuable to visualize in map format. So staff are working with existing resources. And when I say existing resources, I mean existing GIS data, but also the agency of which Strategic Growth Council is a part has a GIS specialist. So I'm in conversation with that specialist so that we can leverage our agency's existing kind of resources and knowledge to try to build out an interactive map that would allow us to see something like ancestral lands, public lands, private lands, but then also maybe farmland classifications, right? So you could start to get a sense of the state, right? And how equity is a consideration in relation to ag lands in the state. So this is what we're thinking right now, and you can tell that we're still in the exploring stage of what resources are there, what could we do to make sure that we're producing a map that shows a lot of different considerations relevant to the task force, as the members have been telling us what they want to know, want to hear. So I'll stop here and see whether anyone has a response to this kind of initial thought process of where we would take this task. It would be much bigger than this one subcommittee, in other words. So I'll pause here and see if anyone has thoughts, suggestions.
Not really any suggestions, but that sounds very interesting to see that. That sounds like a great idea.
Thanks, Charlie.
Once this tool is built, I'm going towards the creative thinking mode here. So once this tool is built, let's try to think creatively about a way that it might be able to support or inform recommendations. So you can kind of, I don't know, keep that in your mind.
Thanks for that, Megan. I think that's important. And also it does speak broadly to some of the other things that task force members have expressed as priorities, which is building up the knowledge, right? Building up that context, building up the justification for recommendations. So both it can lead to recommendations based on the knowledge from that visualization, but also the visualization itself. We understand that task force members have sort of asked for both of those things could be valuable in a map. Hopefully that makes sense. Any other like thoughts here? And this is something, as you can tell, is unfolding. So it will not just be this subcommittee's like role, of course, to advise on this. This would be something that staff will continue trying to move along, and then we'll bring to the full task force, and we'll make sure that the wide variety of priorities or considerations that the task force has will be reflected in this map to the extent possible. Okay. Not seeing any other hands. I think what I will do is move from here. But again, this is an update to you, and there will be further information forthcoming. Here we wanted to give an update on work that has progressed, right, since this subcommittee had its first meeting. So you might remember that this subcommittee was actually the first subcommittee to meet following our August task force meeting. Yes. May. Okay, May task force meeting. So other things have happened since then, right? We have these 3 new subcommittees that were established in August. There you go. And so and the other subcommittees, we now have 6, as you likely know. And so they all have been meeting throughout since this first meeting of this subcommittee. So in that time, some of the topics of interest that had come up for the subcommittee in its first meeting have been, others have expressed interest in exploring those through other subcommittee work. So as I think you all might know, because I think you are part of other subcommittees, we're really right now in the puzzle building phase of trying to find which subcommittee, which working group is looking into a piece of an issue so that then comes back to the full task force, to the appropriate subcommittee, so that the work is shared but not duplicated unnecessarily, right? So we wanted to share with you some of the ways that topics that might be of interest to this subcommittee have been taken up or mobilized in other areas. So the question after I sort of talk through this for this subcommittee would be, are there ways that you see this subcommittee as complementary to that? Are there things that are not yet talked about between those research requests and between this list that you feel like maybe it does need another working group, right, that this subcommittee might want to create? It's just a chance to check in and see whether the work that you have heard happening reflects the priorities and the goals that you have to move us toward those recommendations. So there is a land back working group in the Land Access Acquisition and Ancestral Land Return Subcommittee. That was the most recent subcommittee meeting, and I believe that maybe everyone here had been in that one. Does anyone know if I'm right about that? But a land back working group was established there. A public lands working group was established in the Land Access Acquisition and Ancestral Land Return Subcommittee. And I believe that both of these working groups has space Oh, maybe not public lands. No, not public lands. Okay, land back. I believe Emily is on that subcommittee. And then the Land Use Governance and Sovereignty Subcommittee, that is a subcommittee made up of Dorian and Emily, and they have a working group, the two of them as well. And they are very much interested in sovereignty, right, as a key idea, right, in relation to land access. And so I'll pause there and just share back that these groups are already kind of in existence. And I'd like to hear from this subcommittee members, whether you see something that you'd like to spend some more time on in the context of this subcommittee, whether you have thoughts about how this work could complement but not duplicate your work, just an opportunity to check in about the landscape of work that's happening across the task force.
I just there's so many overlapping ideas and work to be done. It almost gets confusing, because I'm glad these committees are formed. Um, yeah, so they can be more detailed then, I guess. But I don't have the capacity to join any other committees right now.
Understood. Thank you, Darlene. Do you have a sense of what would for you be a good way to learn about this work, right? So, in other words, are there ways that obviously these working groups are kind of mobilizing ideas, right? And then bringing those ideas back to a public setting. So would it just be updates to this subcommittee from staff about work that is moving in other subcommittees? And of course, that would also be verbalized at the full task force meeting. I'm just wondering if you can envision a way that would help to learn about this work and be constructive for you as those puzzle pieces start to fall into place.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best thing, because there's so many working pieces and the staff knows what's going on in all the committees. That would probably be the best way. And then also because the people on these committees are in a lot of what we're all doing together anyway, so we can hear from them. So
Mm-hmm.
I personally think that's the best way, is to have the staff report back.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
This is also a good time for everyone here if you want to share out an idea to the folks working on land back. So I think land back is just Emily right now. There's one space available. Public lands is Leah and Lawrence. So there's nice that there's overlap there. So let's use public lands as an easy one since Lawrence is here. So right now we can maybe have a brief conversation about what's going on in public lands and the ideas that are percolating with Lawrence and Leah. And then this is a nice space just to make sure that they're talking about all of the important things that are important to this group as well, right? So kind of inserting a little bit of feedback and thought in their process, right? If we get this one chance to work together, like Darlene, is there something that you might want to share with Lawrence and Leah? Like, make sure you all are talking about this as you're considering the issue of public lands. I mean, that was an example. But
Yeah. No, I think that's great because we can do that in these types of meetings. But we know we just talked about the high speed railway
Mm.
lands. I think that's something, I don't know if that's considered public lands or what that would be considered, but it is a land that is still and it's probably gonna be on hold until the project is complete, but it's a good chance for us to kind of do the research on what happens with those lands afterwards. And if it's owned by the state of California and we're making recommendations, then let's put our hat in there early.
I have another question about these other groups. is the idea that each of these work groups within the subcommittee are we coming up with like one or two like recommendations on that specific topic for the final report? Is that meant to like divvy up the workload so that these smaller groups can focus on the detail, like Darlene said earlier? Seems like there is a little bit of overlap with what you previously shared, Camille, in the staff research requests. Um, but I really appreciate what Darlene said too about capacity and, making sure there's a way to get the information from these various groups in a timely and functional manner so that we're able to learn about what is being talked about in these groups, but then maybe not having to attend all of those other additional meetings if we can't make that, knowing that they all fall under this very important umbrella of how to include these recommendations in this final report. And I guess another question then for the other members of the committee, since I'm a new member, um, is that within this umbrella, what was the original focus for sustaining natural and cultural resources? Is there a more specific request or area that this group should focus on? That's just a question because I wasn't present at the other meetings. So thank you.
I'll respond to the first part of your question at the end in a minute, but let's sit with your second question first and see if any members have any thoughts. I think that's a really great question. Are there ways that this subcommittee would like to consider work that can complement between the research requests that were just shared and this? Is there anything that the Sustaining Natural and Cultural Resources subcommittee sort of could see itself, what particular kind of complementary work would you like to do? Lawrence, go ahead.
I mean, not from me, but I think we're the committee, right? We can decide if we wanted to do more. I don't personally, I don't think there's more. But the first meeting was really basically outlined what Camille presented was those the bullet items. What we wanted to focus on was the cultural burning, tribal sovereignty, and then the other request is for mapping, if I remember right. Yeah, and protection of native sites. So mainly just protecting the cultural resources in general and from a native perspective in our work. In the work of the task force, the final recommendations.
Thanks, Lawrence. I think that makes sense, to as complementary to those other newer groups that were formed. Um,
So we don't actually have to answer this question today, but you all kind of exist for the moment. And if we go on a low simmer, if you will, for a couple of months, and then folks who are involved in other subcommittees and or other working groups make a little bit of progress on the things that they're working on, like land sovereignty and public lands and things like that, that would then give us an opportunity to reconvene in a few months' time, possibly towards the end of the calendar year in December, hear more about the progress that they've made, and then consider what they're putting forward and maybe respond to it. Sometimes it's a little bit easier to respond to something than generate something in the moment, right? And then there's an opportunity to look at the work that these other folks are doing and say, this is a great start. Maybe our committee can fill in some details here, or we have another idea that hasn't been addressed yet that we would want to pursue. So it is a little bit of chicken or the egg or puzzle piecing things together as well. But please keep in mind too, since maybe some of these other subcommittees and working groups have taken on a few of these components that are also of importance to you all, maybe that then leaves a little space for you all to kind of think about these things and decide if there's other things that emerge as priorities for you to pick up. And that also might be easier to respond to once we have some more information from the research requests coming up in a couple of months.
Yeah, thank you, Megan. And I think that does speak a bit to your first question, Thea, which is how might this work, right, continue in detail, right? So these working groups, the idea is that the working groups can jump into some language, can jump into some specific ideas and examples. And what those working groups can do is that what they will do is bring that work they're doing back to their subcommittees. And then staff are really tasked with making sure that that subcommittee work is then reflected across subcommittees and to the full task force. So it's almost like a nesting, right? You have the kind of in the document sorts of works and ideas. Those are then shared in a public setting in the subcommittee meeting or in the task force meeting. And staff, as we produce research or as we learn insights as you all work and share those insights back, we kind of build up that knowledge base, and that gets shared by staff across the work that's happening. So in other words, those research requests that I shared earlier will be valuable to all of these working groups and subcommittees. And yeah, staff are trying to kind of build out that puzzle, and we do really look to all of you to advise us on whether we have captured those priorities, captured those topics, if something is rising to priority that previously hadn't been, as Megan described, right? Hopefully that answers a little bit of your question about how the work is unfolding. Did that make sense, Thea? Did you have any sort of follow-up thoughts or questions on that? Or
No, thanks, Camille.
so what I'm hearing now is that the research requests described and these working groups as described seem to be moving forward the work that the subcommittee wants to make sure is happening in the context of the task force. And as Megan said, everyone can kind of keep thinking on it, reflecting on it. You'll hear that update, right, in December. And at that point can consider whether there are other ways that the subcommittee wants to engage or wants to unpack some of those ideas. Yeah? Okay. All right, I'm going to move us forward then. And we've actually already talked about this first discussion question. So I think I'll leave it there, which is just given those staff updates on research and working groups, does this align? So I just sort of summarize it. It seems like for this moment, yes, that this work is continuing and that staff will come back to share more about those key policy areas in December, as well as those of the map, right, and those other research requests, the historical ratified, unratified treaties, right? So there's another question for you all, which is, are there certain perspectives or knowledges, right, that you want to bring into the work that you're doing in the subcommittee, or more generally, right? And there have been some other suggestions that have come from other subcommittees. We have two suggestions here for speakers. I believe both of these might have been shared in the land access, acquisition, and ancestral land return meeting. So what I wanted to share here is that the way staff are anticipating bringing in expertise, knowledge, right, guest speakers to the work of the task force is, as a suggestion is made within a subcommittee, we can host that speaker in a subcommittee meeting. All task force members will be informed about that presentation. It will be recorded so that if you're not a member of a subcommittee, but you want to learn from someone who is speaking to that subcommittee, you have that opportunity. So it speaks a bit to Thea's question about how is this work kind of progressing, and if something of interest is happening here, how do we learn about it here? staff are going to make sure that these opportunities, educational opportunities, are shared, even if they are occurring within a particular subcommittee. So I just wanted to put up here that there are these suggestions that we just received. So we will proceed with these and, of course, report back to the full task force, including the members of the subcommittee, as those things are scheduled. Did anyone in this subcommittee and in this space want to have now, or of course, let us know at any time, other perspectives or other people that you would like to bring into this work? I had mentioned previously, like legal scholars will be really important, right, for understanding policy. California Native historians will be really important for understanding that history we described. So wanted to open it here and see if anyone at this point had more to say or add.
Not any people on the top of my head, but I think the Redbud resource group that we're going to be talking about in a little while has a lot of great resources. And the founder, Tyler, is a good person to contact.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you, Darlene. Okay, if there aren't any, right, and that's fine. There's no, we just want to give, every time we have a subcommittee meeting, we'll probably keep asking, right, in case someone has come to mind or you have an idea. But staff are here and you are welcome to sort of think of things and send us things as you think of them, as you have them. That's helpful, Darlene, that suggestion. Well, and we're going to get to the Redbud Resource Group right after this. So I think you've all heard about these deadlines. I brought them up earlier, but as a reminder, we are looking to give an update to this subcommittee in December, where we give an update on that research. There's a lot of research, right? So the likelihood that it's all done might not be done by December, but we will have an update and we will have ways forward, right? And you can advise on that progress to date. So we have that plan, and the goal of getting that to you in December would be so that you could, as a subcommittee, consider some language that you might want staff to include in that preliminary draft of recommendations that will be shared at the February task force meeting. So as I think you might have all heard in other subcommittees, that February task force, we are intending to have a very preliminary draft. Some subcommittees, some working groups might have already come up with some language. Others might just have sort of bullet point, here's what we're exploring, here's what we want to include, and we're still figuring out what to say about it. But we just want to make sure that deadline is in everyone's minds in this subcommittee to consider how to move that work forward. Any questions or thoughts on this, and then otherwise we'll jump to a brief discussion about those resources from the Redbud Resource Group. Okay, great. All right. We will have at the end of this meeting, of course, a chance to say again, like where this meeting is ending, next steps and things like that. So we'll come back to some of these ideas that we have. Megan, I'll look to you to make sure. Also, I know you've got your eye on time and public comment and everything like that. But we had been hearing in the task force meetings and also in subcommittee meetings that part of what people were interested to know more about and learn more about is the histories, right, of land theft, land dispossession, and like education, right, public education, public knowledge about why equitable land access is a critical concern in relation to agricultural land and the work of this task force, right? And land for food, fiber, cultural resource, medicines, right? So as part of that process, and I believe Redbud Resource Group has been specifically recommended by task force members previous as a place with a lot of resources. We just wanted to share in those briefing materials and give the opportunity in this meeting, if there was any way that you, as subcommittee members, wanted to consider this group, either like could be brought in as guest speakers. I know, Darlene, you kind of just mentioned that. or work with this group and its existing set of educational tools and resources, right, toward moving for sovereignty and equity would be valuable for the work you're doing. So in that briefing packet, as you all know, we shared 3 of the many things that this group has. I'm just going to quickly kind of show little images of that to jog your memory, and then I'm going to just ask a question. Is this of value to the subcommittee, and how might this be valuable to the subcommittee and the task force? So we had shared this land back spider graph, and just sort of posed the question, do you see this reflected in the dimensions of land equity that we are talking about, in relation to the broader set of considerations and priorities for the task force? Just highlighting that there is a lot of historical, and each of these, if you go to the website, and the URL is there, if you go to these, it actually drops down and describes each of these periods, right? This is the legacy of lands loss. And then this land easement resources as one kind of tool, one kind of pathway. And I know easements have come up, and it is of particular interest to the Land Use Governance and Sovereignty Subcommittee as well, to understand how to create structures that allow for fully practicing sovereignty on easement land, right? So there's resources like this exist, by the Red Bud Resource Group has created these. So I just wanted to share those, and a lot of you probably already are very well aware of these resources, but we were wondering, do you think these are valuable to the work you're doing? And if so, how might they be mobilized? How might they be made valuable to the subcommittee, or to the task force overall? So it's a broad question, but wanted to pose that here for you all and see if anyone had any initial responses to these resources, or thoughts about whether and how these could be of value to your work.
Yeah, so I think it's a great resource. I talk about a lot of these things all the time, but it's really good to get in there and see that curriculum has been developed, and it's easy to refer to. Something that I wanted to do for a long time, but I have not set the time aside to do it. And I got to meet Tyler, um, in May, I think, and I got to be at a meeting where they were at some land that I guess they have an easement. They have some kind of agreement. I'm not sure what agreement it is, but they are going there, and they're able to gather and able to take care of the land. And there's a lot of native plants there. They're very proud of the area. But just really the curriculum is, I don't know where else you can find stuff like this that would really explain the history of California, and it's very well laid out. And then this land back spider graph, we use something similar to this with like the healing for our kids, like to see how their wellness is, and spiritual, mental, physical, and emotional well-being. And it's similar to this spider graph, which I really like, because when we're using it for our youth to see their wellness, they're able to see where they need to improve or where they're really good at, that type of thing. But this also, in the land back, uh, it gives people when you graph it, it gives you really a good bird's eye of what's really happening. And if it is excellent, or if it, is non-existent or extremely limited. So I really like this. I like the explanation that they put towards it. And all these things do revolve around land back. And so I just think it's very well thought out, very well put together. Um, yeah, so I really support using this. I think it would give people who don't understand um, good resources to learn and to look at, especially like the timelines. A lot of people aren't aware of all the timelines that happen in California. to Native people in not just, and then all these things, this is the timeline, but what happened during that timeline and how much it overlaps with everything and where we're at today. A lot of us are still dealing with some of those things that happened way back when and why things are the way they are today. So I really like the work that they're doing, and I would recommend them coming to talk and even to do maybe even just a hands-on type of workshop for the people on this committee working group, including staff, because they have a way of really helping people make that connection um, to our people. And it's something you can't read in a book. It's something you can't, just look on a website and understand. So, yeah, I would recommend them being at one of our next meetings if they can.
Thank you, Darlene.
Our meeting's in Sonoma next. Is that what it is? I can't remember.
I was moved to Salinas.
To Salinas.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I was gonna say maybe they could host us.
Yeah, I know they're Santa Rosa area.
Yeah.
Is that right, Darlene?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there might, of course, be other ways that we can collaborate with them and future meetings as well. So I appreciate that recommendation and I'll just let you know that we did email them in advance of sharing these materials just so that they knew that we had found these valuable and had shared them out. So there's a start of a conversation there.
Good. I'll
That
follow up too. I'll follow up with
thank you. I
just
appreciate
because she appreciates people using it. They didn't create it for nothing, So that's good. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the follow-up. I appreciate that.
Well, I'll just share that I thought it was also really interesting, that spider graph.
Mm.
I think that uh, just in conversations, myself as a non-native person and also situated within the state government, and uh, I'm also the tribal liaison for CDFA. So sometimes I organize a quarterly work group and we talk about issues and concerns related to outreach and engagement with tribes. And this tool is very useful because it's not often considered these different dimensions, which are important. And I also agree, Darlene, I think we should definitely, if they're available and if we can pay them for their time to come to present to the entire task force, I think it's really valuable to inform how this work will be situated within the recommendations as a whole. Um, and I also appreciate the timelines because it isn't, a book is one thing, but being able to see the timelines and the dates and things and those different dimensions that they present are also really incredible and impactful. Um, for people who haven't learned about our history in California. And so I look forward to having them at one of our meetings as well. And how to use that spider graph also potentially within our final recommendations and making sure that those dimensions are perhaps included or considered or even using this as a tool when we're developing the recommendations and as how we're doing within this spectrum.
Thank you, Zia.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're a great resource. However, maybe for this committee, we could narrow it down to the cultural and natural resources aspect of it or focus, and see because they're talking about it's related, but they're talking about ownership and we're not going to get that. So I think, but even without ownership, we can still focus on preserving the cultural resources for the tribes.
Thanks for that, Lauren. So you mean because they do have a wealth of other resources that are focused on cultural knowledge, culture sharing, culture stewardship. So you're seeing that as really valuable in the context of this subcommittee. Did I get that correct?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, thank you for that.
Because I mean, we can get like you showed, there's other subcommittees focusing on returning land
Right.
but we can get tap Rosebud to maybe focus on kind of the cultural and natural resources, protection of that, preservation of that for tribal people. That would be more focused for this subcommittee, although they are very broad on their services.
Understood. Thank you for that recommendation, Lawrence. It seems like there are things that would be, and I think Thea and Darlene, you brought this up as well. There are resources that this group has produced that really should be oriented toward staff and the full task force. And then Lawrence, you're also sharing that there are some particular knowledges or approaches or pathways that might be more specifically tailored to interests of various subcommittees or working groups. So that's noted, and we'll think about ways that we could make sure that's happening on those multiple levels. Well, thank you all very much for thinking through this. And I know that this is probably not a brand new resource to all of you, but we appreciate you talking through it and thinking alongside staff when there are such valuable resources there by people who are very knowledgeable about this and have put the work into developing these things, how through the work of the task force or through the work of a subcommittee that could be engaged. So we really appreciate you taking that time to think through this with us and continue to think through it. I think from there, I'm not sure if there are any other comments here, and if not, I believe we are moving right along. Megan, oh, sorry, did someone unmute? Did I see, or no, just me. Okay, Megan, go ahead.
Or it was me. I unmuted.
Caught my
eye. Okay, let's do a quick review, then pause just to see if anything else got shaken loose up in those fabulous brains that everyone has. Okay, so we talked about the three primary research requests. We made some important nuanced addition to the language in the first research request to emphasize Native ancestral land return and tribal sovereignty, and we'll do our best to carry that language throughout all of our documentation moving forward. Really appreciate the help with that. Also talked about when looking at conducting the policy analysis and looking at recommendations that are being put forward from other avenues. I was going to say institutions, but I don't think that's the right word. Thinking if staff can maybe do a preliminary analysis of those recommendations, but also kind of being careful there with that particular request, because we want you all as subcommittee members to do some thinking on that for yourselves and give us guidance in that direction. Regarding that conversation about the research request for ratified treaties, we're now expanding that and the language used there to incorporate a summarization of unratified treaties and to take a closer look if it's possible, if there is land in those areas that's not currently being utilized, and if that can be made accessible to tribes. I might be paraphrasing that, but I think I got the gist of that particular request. Then we had some conversation about parallel or similar efforts that are happening across other subcommittees and working groups that were recently established, because this was the first subcommittee to meet in July, and then moving forward in September, other subcommittees were formed. And then Darlene had mentioned the importance of considering the high-speed railway lands. And so maybe incorporating some of that research and discussion within the public lands working group. So we'll be sure to carry that thread over. Really then, I think we're at a place where we've got some great ideas on the table, and we've refined the scope of the research request. Now staff needs time to conduct that research. So the plan is to come back in December with an update. Certain pieces might be further along than others because we do have other meetings to prepare for, but at minimum, an update in December. We're going to try to move things along. And then we've got that mapping piece too, which will be really great and useful for all of the task force members. And then just this last conversation about reviewing the tools that are available via the Red Bud resource group and figuring out a way if we can apply the spider graph to development of the recommendations or reference that, and maybe some of the other tools that are already in existence here. And then inviting someone, maybe Tyler or Taylor, if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, to an upcoming task force meeting. And I like what you just shared there, Lawrence, about kind of as we move these different pieces along and knowing what people are working on and what's already out there, maybe it gives us an opportunity for this subcommittee to really hone in on that protection of cultural resources piece, since we've already got folks working on land back and sovereignty. So I'm kind of keeping that in mind and thinking that through. So I just want to encourage you all, as you sit with this and as you continue to discuss this, with your colleagues at home, friends, family, and then when we come back together at the full task force meeting November 13th, 14th, if you have any brainstorms or you have any ideas, jot them down on a piece of paper, send them to us if you want, we'll compile them, but all ideas are great ideas. And so we don't just have to wait until we're in these scheduled moments together to collect that. I know that we've got some parameters that we have to adhere to because of bag leaking in terms of the way that we discuss them, but ideas as they come to you, because I think it's going to start to snowball now that we've got a little bit of rhythm and momentum here. Let's make sure we're collecting those. Our task force meeting together in Salinas is coming up November 13th and 14th. We had thought, how can we do a report back on the efforts of this subcommittee and other subcommittees. We're still working through the agenda there and timing and things like that, but I think it might be most effective if staff prepares a slide or two, kind of summarizing the research efforts and the direction that this group is going. I wasn't hearing a strong desire or any real rationale for us as a subcommittee to regroup in advance of November 13th. Stop me if I'm wrong here, because everyone's working on some other things between now and then. So if there's no opposition, I'm going to propose
I think it would be good to regroup.
to regroup before November.
I think so, just because we're missing Emily, and
Okay.
there were a little bit of changes on the research request
Mm-hmm.
from when she was here the first time.
Okay. One thing that we can do, and we do intend to do, is connect with Emily before November, and we can brief her on those changes. But Lawrence, if we all got our calendars out and made time together, would there be a secondary goal aside from updating Emily? I just want to make sure that we would, develop an agenda and make good use of our time together.
I mean, while we're there, maybe just enough, like take a look at the slide before the meeting and see what's going to be presented.
Okay. Okay. So we might be able to do that like very end of October or first week of November. And we could probably do that relatively quickly, maybe a 45-minute session, maybe even less, 30 minutes. So I can reach out and we can do a quick scheduling effort and see what happens there. We'll also prepare meeting notes, of course, from today's meeting. And then the briefing packet and prior materials, there's really good stuff in the briefing packet from the July meeting as well. I'll post it on the website, which is the usual website. Did I miss anything by way of our recap and next steps?
I guess, Megan, just to highlight that we were thinking that December would be when this subcommittee would reconvene to hear updates on that research. So I know that's after the November meeting, but just that I don't know that that was highlighted in this conversation yet. So we're imagining a December regrouping for that research update.
Okay, so possible quick reconvening in advance of the November 13th, 14th task force. We can swing it to update Emily on some of the modifications of the research requests, and then to review the update slide that staff can prepare and do quick coordination, but then getting something on the books for the December time to get more substantive updates on the research efforts and start to dive in. And probably at that time, we'll have more substantive updates from the complementary working groups as well.
Yeah, and to back up, I mean, just to get feedback from Darlene and Thea, it seems like the action items are not directly cultural natural resources. It's a start, but I wonder if the new committee members could add more that's more natural resource and cultural resource specific.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, everything we've talked about has been important, but I think there is more, especially when we're talking about the cultural resources. We haven't really hit that, and I would see more of like of protection of sites, and I guess more cultural use rather than I don't even know how to put it. But yeah, I agree with you, Lawrence. I think we're missing stuff.
You know, what just hit me is, remember in May when we kind of did a big giant brainstorm together and we were like writing down ideas? There were some ideas we extracted from that working session. I think we talked them through in July. I'll have to go back and look at the slide deck. But what you were just talking about, Darlene and Lawrence, kickstarted that for me. Remember, we had some conversations about how can we maybe write policy or something or suggest policy to better protect the protection of cultural resources when land is being turned over or tilled or changing ownership. So I don't know if that, like those ideas, there might be several other ideas. I don't know if those are embedded in the work plan or it might be worth dusting those off and doing some crosswalking. Does that ring a
And
bell for anyone else?
yeah, it does. And I know that yeah, that's kind of where it started.
Yeah.
And yeah, we need to do more work about around that.
Okay. Can I take that as an action item for us, Camille and Caleb, to
Yeah.
go back with our notes and pull out what we think might not be yet included in other conversations that are related to this? Everyone's
Yeah.
tracking it. Okay.
And I
Cool.
know that Thea also, I think, wanted to jump in. So go ahead, Thea.
No, I was just thinking about, this is along the lines of the policy analysis that was a task for the staff.
Mm.
Maybe
Oh,
that could be a little bit more of a focus of that policy analysis too. I mean, considering there's other dimensions that other subgroups are looking at, but for this particular subcommittee, we're looking at protection of cultural and natural resources. And so how does that, maybe that's a little bit more of a specific policy analysis to see how that is included already in legislation and policy to be more helpful to guide this group, our group here.
yeah. Thank you all for that discussion. I think staff definitely can come back and be a bit clearer about the specific way that this subcommittee could focus. So I think cultural fire, protection of native sites, remains, artifacts, and consultation are all related in some ways to the protection, right, of cultural resources, cultural practices. So I think that it'll be important for what we can do is come back to you as subcommittee members. We appreciate that comment and be really thoughtful and reflective of that priority for this subcommittee. Does that sound right? Because the ancestral land return, of course, is important, but also is being mobilized in other areas. So I see these other actually components as really what I'm hearing you all reflecting now. Lawrence, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I just think we're missing specifically, and I'm sure it'll be fall under these some of these bullets, but like hunting, just hunting for
Okay.
game is not something that's written down, but it's definitely an important resource. Different routes, and I'm just speaking to my tribe, and roots gathering and
Mm.
other sacred sites. There's sacred sites listed, but not, yeah, there's nothing about hunting or pine nut gathering or digging for um, digging for roots for nutrition, that type of thing. Natural resources, but also cultural as well. So it's in here, but it's in between the lines. It's not specifically written. And so then I think of other thing, protection even on private land. In an ideal world, a ranch would that happens to have a sacred site would allow natives from that area to access that, and then even gather if there's any remnants of game or food, allow tribes to access that and protect it.
Okay, so it sounds like what staff need to do is really probably get a bit more specific about what some of these things are. And I think, Lawrence, you did just add another piece to this, which would be other cultural practice related to hunting, stewardship, right, of food, fiber, medicine, cultivate. Those are practices that you want to make sure are included in this work. So staff will continue that. And I imagine that this first research update that we provide for you all in December might very well lead to maybe even working groups. I know capacity is an issue, but there might be a one or two of you who really want to dig in to a particular set of research findings or further that work along. So I think if anyone has that, if anyone knows that now, I'll just leave that open to you. If someone wants to jump in and actually form a group that actually develops out some of the specificities of these, I want to give you that opportunity to do that. Or we can take another pass at this. Staff can take another pass at this. And then in December, there might be areas that still not quite doesn't have the detail that the subcommittee is looking for, and so we can move it there. So I guess I'm putting that to you all. Do you think the timeline we've mapped out is going to work for you in the subcommittee? If we start here with that other addition that Lawrence just shared, is that a path forward, or are there other ideas right now that you'd like to mobilize in the interim? Seeing none. So it sounds like maybe just making sure that we'll take those thoughts that everyone just shared, be reflective of them, thoughtful about them, be as specific as we can about cultural practice, right? Sustaining natural and cultural resources, right? And then check in with you all. And there might be other ways to continue that work. Does that sound, we're good on that? That's the plan from here?
Yes, sounds
Right.
good.
Thank you. Okay.
Let's do a quick check for public comments. Any public comment today? You go ahead and use your raise hand feature if interested. Not seeing any public comment come through. Wonderful. And I think we're ending just about on time. Once more, we really appreciate your thoughtfulness, your time today, your dedication to this process. Upcoming meetings, if you are interested to join Community outreach is Monday, a subcommittee, community outreach. From noon to 2, we're going to dive into the survey tool. So that'll be a good discussion, give an update on recent and upcoming conferences, and talk about the outreach plan for the task force. And then regular task force meeting, folks will be joining in person, but there will be an opportunity to join virtually for members of the public and or members who are unavailable to travel in, but we're hoping most everyone can, November 13th and 14th. And all of the meeting materials, we're working on processing those from our suite of 6 subcommittee meetings that occurred over the last 3 weeks here, and they'll be posted to our project website. Any closing comments from task force members or staff?
I have a quick question. Also, thank you so much. I'm really grateful to be a part of this group. I think it's really such a central part of the Land Equity Task Force. And so I'm really grateful to be here as on this group. I have a question about the Community Outreach Subcommittee. I understand they're developing a tool, a survey, and I'm wondering if the entire task force will be able to review that before it's going out to the public, or if this is only going to be decided within that subcommittee. Just a quick process question.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Thea. So the survey was sent to all task force members and feedback was requested. I believe that deadline had actually been September 30th, but I also believe that if you have the chance to review that and do have feedback on that, that's not a like closed process.
Oh, yeah, that's true. I mean, I did provide feedback, but I'm just wondering if that was the last time that we get to see it, or if we have to attend that
Before,
subcommittee in order to see it or comment on it again. I just think the more eyes on something like that, the better.
yeah, thank you for that question. So I will confirm this with Tessa, who's sort of leading that effort. But I believe she was hoping in the community outreach subcommittee to bring that survey feedback that was received. Thank you for participating in that to the public space of that subcommittee. Have that subcommittee discuss it, and then the goal was to be able to begin the process of distribution. But it sounds like you might be asking or would like staff to consider. It seems like there might be an interest in making sure the full task force has had a chance to engage that in the context of a public discussion. Am I right about that, Thea? Am I hearing your
No,
question?
I don't think it necessarily needs to be that, just that we might have another chance to look it over in its final form before it goes out, in case anyone in particular has other comments on it. This group, we're talking about preservation of cultural resources. There may be some nuances in those questions that we might want to take a look at again. So just wanted to offer that.
Thank you, Thea. That is really helpful. Okay, staff will definitely we'll talk about that as a team and consider ways that this subcommittee is not the sort of final moment of every box has been checked and it is fully. There might be, I think there would be value in another pass to subcommittee or sorry to task force members. Am I getting that right? It doesn't have to be in the context of a meeting, but rather just making sure that shared out people have the opportunity to engage.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you, Dia. That's helpful. Helpful feedback. Appreciate that.
All right, folks. Anything more? Great. Well, thank you. Have a lovely rest of the afternoon and enjoy the weekend. We'll see some of you on Monday and we'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Okay. Now, stop recording.